Welcome to lecture number 32 for ECE 476, Advanced Embedded Systems. In this lecture, we're looking at using your Raspberry Pi Pico in Wi-Fi and AP mode. Now at the end of the lecture, we're going to get to this point, where I'm going to send data from my Pi Pico, and the data can be whatever you want. In this case, just random numbers. But what I can do is, if that corresponds to temperature, pressure, light level, humidity, every time I ping it, I can get an update and find out what's happening in the Pico world. So that's where we want to get to. Now to do that, we're going to use the Pico in AP mode. Now the Pico-W actually has two different Wi-Fi capabilities. You have AP mode, and you also have a client mode. Client mode will be about 2 lectures from now. In AP mode, the Pico sets up its own Wi-Fi network, completely independent of the internet. So if you have no internet connection, not a problem. The Pico sets up its own network, and I can have different clients connected to it. Each client can send and receive data from the Pico. For receiving data, that'll be this lecture, the Pico takes measurements like temperature, pressure, flow, light, whatever, and sends it to the client as a web page, so the client can see what's happening. And the next lecture will go the other way around. The client can do things like turn on and off lights, send data back to the Pico. So that's kind of where we're heading. In AP mode, the range is about 50 feet. Again, the Raspberry Pi Pico is not really designed for long-range Wi-Fi. In client mode, I have a range of about 30 feet or 300 feet, the range of your router. So this lecture is just looking at AP mode. I've got my own standalone network. Doesn't matter if the internet is around or not. So what we're going to look at is how to do that, how to create web pages, and some HTML programming to set up those web pages. And where we want to get to is how to create a table that has data that's being updated on the fly. So, starting out, I would like to create a local area network using the Raspberry Pi Pico as the host. And just to keep it simple, let's start out with the simplest web page you can come up with, one that says Hello World. Now to do that, I need to do some HTML coding. One way to create HTML coding is to create a string. In this case, my string is called X. This contains the HTML coding for a web page that says Hello World. Every time I call web page, it returns X. That's my string, that's my web page. A little bit more on the coding a little bit later. Problem with this approach is in HTML coding, character turns don't mean anything, double spaces don't mean anything, so really this is just one big long run-on string. A little bit easier way, at least in my opinion, easier way to do this is to create a file that contains your web page. In this case, this is my file. It's HTML, end of the HTML. Here's the body. There's the message. It's got character turns, line feed, spacing in there. Makes it easier to read. The problem, though, is I've got to convert that text file into a text string that gets rid of all the character turns, line feeds, double spaces, and stuff like that. Well, to do that, I'm going to create this guy. This is going to be on my Pi Pico. It needs to be there so that I can read it as a text file. In a previous lecture, we looked at that. This will be the file, in this case, helloworld.html. So this is the name of the file that's located in. And just for notation, yellow is an HTML program. Gray is a Python program for this lecture, just so you can remember the difference. Once I've created that file, I can now read it. I'll have a subroutine called web page. The way you read a text file is you do an open command. Here's the name of the file. This is kind of optional. It's always going to be read text file as default. I will then read in the entire file. This reads in everything, including the character turn line feed from the beginning to the end. I then want to strip out the character turn line feeds. I could also strip out the double spaces as well. But here I just replaced all the character turn line feeds with a space. Then when I'm done, return X as a big long string. So that's kind of one way to create a web page. that's what I'll be doing throughout in this lecture and actually the next 4 lectures. The next step is to create a local area network. To do that, I'm going to use a couple different files. With the network, use the routine WLAN, use the routine configure, and activate. What the first one does, that creates a local area network in AP mode. This will change in 2 lectures when we go to it as a client, but for now we're in AP mode. The AP configure sets up the network with the network name and password. Here the network name is Pico Network and the password is password. Again, doesn't have to be real secure. This is just for test purposes. I will then try to turn on the network. What this one does is it keeps on looping until the network is active. And once it's active, I'm going to print out the AP, your network is active, and here's the IP address. Once the network is active, I will create a socket and then lock that address for the socket and then listen for up to 5 devices. So I can have 5 clients attached to my network. That's like 5 different cell phones, 5 different computers, all listening. At that point, you're ready to listen and respond to pings for devices. Then the last step is call routine accept. What that does is that waits for a ping from a client. Once you get a ping, I'm going to print out here's who pinged me. Print out saying I got a connection from this device. So what you're going to see is I got a connection from this device. And once you get that connection, I will echo back the web page, the text file corresponding to the web page, then close the connection. That's kind of how the HTML works. Every time I get a ping, I open a connection, read the ping, echo back whatever I want, close the connection. Wait for new connection, open it, wait for ping, echo back, close the connection. Happens over and over again. Probably easier to see as an example. So if we go over to Thonny, well, Thonny, look at this guy. This is probably the simplest you can get for setting up a AP mode. All it does is it sets the name and the password of the network, opens the connection, waits until the network has been created, locks the address, and then loops. Wait for a ping, report the ping, echo back, repeat. And what I echo back is my web page. Just says, hello world, is that file. So let's try that. I'm going to go over to Thonny. Here's the hello world app, or code. It's not the current one that's running. When I run this code, what you're going to see down here in the shell window is an error message. Once you open up a network, you can't open up a second one. So I've got a power off, power on. Probably a more elegant way of doing it, but this works. Stop the old one. Now run the program again. I'm trying to create a network. I've succeeded. I've connected network at 192.168.4.1. Now on my computer, I'm going to start looking for networks. My network is Pico Network. There she is. I'm going to connect to it. The password is password. Once you are connected, Okay, there, it says I've connected to that network. I can now open up my favorite browser. Here I'm using Google Chrome. Connect to 196.168.4.1. Again, where that comes from is going back to Thani. There is the name of my network. When I connect to it, do a refresh, what happens is over in Thani, I get this message saying I've got a connection from 192.168.4.17. That is my browser. This is the message that came for the ping. We'll use that later to send data back to the Pico. What the Pico then does is it then echoes back the web page, which shows up as "Hello World." So that doesn't look all that exciting, but actually is pretty exciting. I am now talking from the Pico to my computer. And you can also do that with your cell phone. If I connect my cell phone to the Pico network, connect to that web page, go over to my cell phone. Under my connections, there's the network, Pico network. If I connect to it, I can then go back to my web browser, connect to page 192.168.4.1, and there's the message, "Hello World." All right, so that's kind of exciting, sort of. As I mentioned in the shell window, every time I hit refresh, I get a message. This is who connected to me. So the Pico knows who's talking to it, who's listening. This is the message that came from it. That's the ping. Doesn't mean a whole lot for us right now. Later on, we're going to use that to send data back to the Pico. And I can send a message. So if I want to change the message, all I have to do is change the HTML code. So the next part of this lecture is going to be looking at HTML coding. Now there's a lot you can do with this. I think there's a 3-course sequence over in computer science on HTML coding. We're not going to cover all of that. Just going to cover some basics, how to do some HTML coding, how to set up a table, and how to change the data in the table. So kind of one good place to go. If you want to know more about HTML coding, W3 Schools is actually a really good spot. What this has quite a few tutorials on HTML coding, and it has interactive windows. So for example, let's go there. Going here, you've got all these different lessons. Here's the various lessons you can look at. What's pretty neat about this website is you can try out the code. So we do try yourself. I can sit there, let's bring this over so you can see it. Take this code, run it. Here's what shows up. I can modify the code. Let's add another paragraph. /p. Run that code. You can try your code, see how it works. Once you get your code refined, copy that over and change the hello world.html to this program, this coding, and you know what it's supposed to look like. So anyway, back at the ranch. A couple things to note with HTML syntax. HTML is not case sensitive, so it's different than C, different than Python, which is case sensitive. HTML ignores character turns, and single quotes and double quotes can be interchanged. For example, if I want to have a quote that says, to quote Charlie Brown, rats, I can use a double quote saying here's the start of the string, and here's a quote inside of it. Or I can use a single quote to mean the start of the string. Here's a double quote on the inside. You know, kind of interchange the two. It doesn't care. Here I'm going to look at how to create web pages with headings, paragraphs, and a table. And again, there's a whole lot more you can do with the HTML coding. That's all we're going to look at in this lecture. And the goal is I want to be able to actually change the data in the table to correspond to the temperature, pressure, flow, light, whatever the Pico is actually saying. Now the basic format for an HTML page is as follows. I start saying this is an HTML document, and the backslash, that's HTML notation for the start of a block and the end of a block. The main body starts with the keyword body and the end of the body. Then this will be heading. So example, this shows up as large boldface font, start of the heading, end of heading. Heading 2 is a smaller heading. There's also heading 3, heading 4, heading 5, heading 6. Each one gets smaller. If I have a paragraph, that starts with a P and a /P. Next paragraph, P/P. So that's kind of the basic format for an HTML document. And again, you could test this out on W3 Schools if you wanted. With HTML, there's a bunch of different options you can do, and there's keywords. The less than A, this is a hyperlink. So everything in here, this is going to be a link. When I click on that, it's going to have an underline under it. Click on it, it's going to take you to this website. And here's the end of the hyperlink. If I want to force a carriage return, I do BR, that's break. Hyperlink, that's kind of repeated. I can set the style. Now under styles, there's a bunch of different options. I can make the font red. I could make the font bigger. This is a 20-point font. This is a 3x font. I can set the background color for your font. I could set the background color for everything in heading 1. You can add an image. You have to know where the image is located. In this case, just take an image that's on the web, copy its location, stick it in there. So if I do image, that'll show up with whatever's in this file, in which case this is from Bison Academy. Now, if your browser can't handle images, it'll instead show some text. What Alt does is it displays what the image will be if you can't see an image. Under Style, I can change the font. And there's a bunch of different fonts you can use. Here's a couple of them. You've got Arial, Arial Black, Comic, Courier. Again, take your pick. I can align the text left, right, center. Your pick. Under Paragraphs, at the end of the paragraph, it adds a space. Now, in Python, or in HTML, character returns mean nothing, double spaces mean nothing. So here's a bunch of double spaces. It ignores that. Here's your character return. It ignores it. If I say, here's the paragraph, and I stick that in there and run it, this is what it shows up as. It stripped out all the spaces, stripped out all the character returns. If you want to keep the character returns and line feeds, use instead of P, use PRE. That's paragraph where you preserve the spacing and character returns. So instead of doing that, I get what you expect for the poem. I can draw a horizontal line. So if I want to have a line right here, another line, you can do that. That's HR. With text, you can format the text to be bold, strong, italics, mark the text, small text, line through text, superscript text, subscript text. And again, each of these, when you're done, you terminate with a /B, so you're done bold facing that text. Okay, tables. Before we go on to tables, again, you can try it in here. So for example, if I want this to be bold, and I'm done, I can try out some of those various features, like is a is now bolded. That's a word. Where am I? Okay, so let's go on to tables. Tables are a nice way to present information. To do a table like this, where I've got 3 columns and 2 rows, I would do the following. I would say start of the table, end of the table. The first row, this will be a heading, meaning bold-faced. I am going to have sensor, reading, and units. Those are the 3 headings. And you keep on going. It just knows the more headings you have, the more columns you have. End of the first row. Second row, I've got my data. The data will be temperature, 74.35 F. Shows up in the second row. And this is left aligned, the default. I could change the settings to make it centered. Then I have a paragraph that says end of table, so this is what shows up. If I want to add borders to a table, I can do a command border. This says all tables, all headings, all data has a border that's 1 pixel, solid black. So here's the table, the outline. Here's the data. Here's the headings. I kind of get these double boxes. That's with the border command. If I throw in the command collapse, then when I have double lines, it collapses those into a single line. It looks a little bit better. You can change the row colors. If I say all tables, headings, and data is going to be a border that's solid white, border collapse. I'll do the border color for the headings and data as being red, green, blue. This is kind of a half brightness green, dark green. The heading has the background color of red, green, blue. So full red, a little bit darker on green and blue. So it's kind of a dark pink. And the data is red, green, blue, light pink. Okay, so that sets up a table. Suppose I want to put data inside that table. Now there's a couple ways of doing it, but the goal here is I want to have these guys being changed so the table isn't static. It changes every time I ping. Well, to do that, I need to change the HTML code. So one way to do this, and I'm sure there are other ways of doing it, but here's one way. When I define my HTML document, I'll come up with a table like so. So here's the start of the document. Here's the heading. Here's the body of the table, beginning, end of the HTML document. Inside the table, I'll have these dummy variables. A, B, 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 C, 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 D, 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 D. What I'm going to do is this is where I want to insert my data. So this will be a standalone file. This is your, in this case, like table.html. Inside my web page routine, I'm going to read in that file. When I do that, it's going to read in this whole guy with character turn line feeds, strip out the character turn line feeds, and replace these guys with the actual data. So in my web page subroutine, I'm going to pass 4 parameters, and it's going to replace A with the first parameter, B with the second, C with the third, D with the fourth. When I'm done, I'll return that string. That'll be my updated web page. And again, I'm sure there's other ways of doing it. This works. To test it, I am going to send random data. So my web page, this is your x1, x2, x3, x4. Just return random numbers. Every time I update the web page, I should get a different answer. So when I try that, let's go over here to Thani. We've got that web page running. Here's my table web page. I'm going to try to run it. It took it. Okay. I was going to complain saying it's already active. But anyways, go over here, update my web page. There's my table. Every time I refresh or go to this website, here's refresh, I get a different reading. And what's happening, I'm going to show this in Thani as well. Every time I hit refresh, I get a ping. It tells me who the ping was from, then I echo. And every time I ping, it'll give me the update for temperature, humidity, pressure, light, which in this case are just random numbers, but you kind of get the idea. So the net result is I now have a web page that the client can see what's happening in the PIC world, the Pico world. So that's kind of AP mode. That's the first type we're going to look at. I want to send data from the Pico to my clients. In this case, I can have up to 5 clients because that's how I set it up. There's the 5 in the setup. But kind of in summary, in AP mode, the Pi Pico sets up a standalone Wi-Fi network, and other devices can connect to this network. Each time they ping me, the Pico knows who pinged me, and it can then reply back with whatever you want. By changing the data in the web page, the clients can see what's happening in the Pico world. Now this actually allows two-way communication. The client is sending data to the Pico is responding, but the two-way communication will be your next lecture. In this lecture, we're just looking at one-way communication, how to send data from the Pico to a client, setting up a Wi-Fi network. And that is lecture number 32 for ECE 476.